Hi there guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 15 Reviewed. I don't have a great recollection of this season personally, but as ever I'll take a look at all of these 22 episodes and give them a rating. If you have been following this series, or even if you have just seen the last couple of videos, then you will know that we have been in this steady pattern of average quality these last few seasons. Which is kind of expected, to be honest, given that the showrunners and the staff members seem to be rather settled at this moment in time. I am just interested to see if this season breaks that pattern, whether it be in a positive or negative way. Anyway, as ever, I'd like to thank the Simpsons wiki for helping me out with the information for the trivia, and with that said and done, let's get on with it, shall we? Season 15, Episode 1, Treehouse of Horror 14. The three short stories this year are Reaper Madness, Frankenstein, and Stop the World, I Want to Goof Off. My trivia for this one is that in the intro, Bart wears a Charlie Brown costume, while Lisa is dressed as Lucy Van Pelt. And my best moment in the episode was Bart and Milhouse removing Homer's donuts before he could eat them. So, the season opener gets a 3 out of 5. The first part was all about Homer becoming the new Grim Reaper after he kills the old one. It doesn't feel that original. In fact, it kind of feels like something Family Guy did. And I have to say that Family Guy did this concept much better too. I also found the tone slightly odd here too. You would think a story about Homer randomly killing people would be dark, but this wasn't at all really. Instead, the segment is filled with Benny Hill chases, and Homer literally outrunning God on a motorcycle. None of these things are that bad, but they also never really gelled together with the story in my opinion, which left me wanting more from this part. Part 2 just felt weird for me. Sure, Frink bringing back his dad in a Frankenstein's monster type situation was okay, and I did like Lisa explaining to him how the 21st century differed from the 20th. Everyone is afraid, and the stock market is much lower. That sounds about right to me. However, much of the rest of the segment was overly strange, even for a Treehouse of Horror. Frink's father's murderous rage seems to come from nowhere, and it was resolved by Frink simply kicking him in the balls. I mean, fair enough, he got the job done, but it was hardly convincing considering that the guy was portrayed as having superhuman abilities earlier on. Part 3 was the best of them by some distance. Seeing Bart and Milhouse fool around with this time-stopping watch was cool, and it felt much more like what a classic Treehouse of Horror segment would be. It's just a creative idea in a time and punishment kind of mold. I like the pranks that they pull off on the unsuspecting townspeople, like pulling Skinner's pants down and him saying, "My slacks, they've descended." I also love how they tease Homer with the donuts. At least they were polite enough to stop him from killing himself though, by changing his knife into a banana. Once they are caught, they stop time again, only this time they can't change it back. It is interesting to see what kind of things Bart and Milhouse want to do, now that they're the only kids on Earth, and it kind of gets your mind thinking what it would really be like to be in that position. All in all, it was a great story, and moves this Treehouse of Horror from being bad to just being average. Season 15, Episode 2, My Mother the Carjacker. Homer's mother returns to Springfield after being cleared of all charges. However, Mr. Burns is not willing to let her go free, and she's re-imprisoned on a technicality. So my trivia for this episode is that the title is a reference to the 1965 TV series My Mother the Car, of which James L. Brooks was actually a writer. And my best moment was just Homer being able to spend time with his mother again. This one is a 4 out of 5. This was a nice little episode. It was just good to see Mona back again, using the first act as just basically an excuse for Homer to find these convoluted messages Mona left for him in a newspaper was a good way to get the plot moving. From there, the episode developed well, as we had a few scenes of her spending time with Homer and the rest of the family, in scenes which kind of reminded me of Mother Simpson, and that in itself is a compliment. Then we had the courtroom scene, which was pretty good. It provided amusing appearances by several minor characters, such as Sideshow Mel and Gil Gunderson. It also had Mr. Burns very much in character. He really was ruthless in wanting Mona behind bars, which is exactly how he should act, based on previous events. The third act was the weakest of the three for me, and as such brought the episode down just a tiny bit. The actual carjacking of the prison bust was not that great, and the whole fake death thing I could have done without. It felt like the first two acts were very well paced, then the third just kind of rushed us to the conclusion. I did at least like how it ended, just as it started with Mona on the run. It was also a clever idea, I thought, to have the family think that she was dead, while the audience know that she is alive. This kind of sets up for her final appearance in season 19. The best jokes in the episode for me were Homer kicking Frank Grimes' gravestone, and Homer saying, "You testified against her," to Grandpa after he tried to get Mona to go back with him. Season 15, Episode 3, The President War Perils. After Martin is forced to resign as student body president, Lisa is elected to replace him. The teachers soon trick her into signing a form that eliminates certain classes. So, the idea for the episode was devised by Al Jean. He was motivated by his love of theatre, especially the musical Evita. And my best moment was Martin's failed casino night. This episode is a 4 out of 5. So yeah, this was a musical, which is a rarity for The Simpsons. In terms of the songs here, they were okay. They had some amusing moments, especially with Willie and Skinner. I don't think any of them are fantastic though, and are certainly not as memorable as some of the greatest ones from this series. I do at least praise the writers for shaking up the formula though. One thing this episode did do very well was showing more of the behind the scenes workings at the school. Just getting a glimpse of how the teachers act in the teachers' lounge was good to see. And of course it plays into Lisa's new role very well. I think they handled Lisa with a good amount of nuance here. She is portrayed as this free spirit who wants to challenge authority and make things better for the students, but at the same time her ego is really challenged by the teachers, and they manage to manipulate her into doing their bidding. It is not necessarily Lisa's fault, because she is just a kid at the end of the day. If anything, I give the episode credit for showing how these things can really go down in real life. The ending was one of the weaker parts of the episode, I felt. It was a tad rushed. Lisa gets taken away to a new school, only for Homer to turn up and refuse to let her go. Meanwhile, we are left to learn about what happened to Springfield Elementary through a few lines just before the credits. It was just a disappointing way to end what had been a pretty solid plot up until that point. The jokes here were fine. As I said, I did like Martin's failed casino night at the start. It is just so in character for the Springfieldians to trash the place after they learned that there was no real money involved. I also liked Willie mocking Milhouse in the teacher's lounge, and Skinner's failed attempt to lock the door on Lisa. In the end, while not everything about this episode came off, the good still comfortably outweighed the bad. Season 15, Episode 4, The Regina Monologues. When Bart earns $1,000, Lisa convinces him to take the family on a vacation to England. Homer, however, ruins the holiday by crashing into the Queen's royal carriage. So some kind of sad trivia is that this is the last episode to be written by John Swartzwelder, although he did return to work on a Simpsons movie. My best moment was Bart's Treehouse Museum. This episode is a 2 out of 5. The first 5 minutes of this episode was alright. I enjoyed the shenanigans Bart got up to after finding the $1,000 bill, such as making a museum based on it and charging people entry. It also kind of amuses me that the people of Springfield have nothing better to do than stare at a bill all day. Once they actually get to England though, the episode goes downhill. None of the scenes in England seem to have any purpose, besides I guess cramming in some English stereotypes and having a few guest stars appearing. Now, coming from someone who is English, the references were somewhat accurate I suppose, but to be honest, J.K. Rowling and especially Tony Blair are possibly some of the very last people that I'd want to see on an episode of The Simpsons. As is all too common, the third act tries to raise the stakes in an over-the-top way. Homer hits the Queen's carriage and is locked up in the Tower of London. Homer tries to escape, only to take the tunnel right into the Queen's room. Then apparently the Queen is willing to let him go as long as he takes Madonna back to America. So yeah, the ending was real stupid. Oh wait, I almost forgot. There is this tacked on story about Abe meeting up with his former English lover. The only thing of note that came from it was the revelation that Homer has a half-sister. Not like it really matters because she's never mentioned again, but still. I kind of wish that side of things was fleshed out more to be honest, because it was more interesting than what we ended up getting. In terms of what entertainment value the episode had, there were a few okay jokes mixed in with a bunch of lazy ones. I did enjoy Moe being willing to pay Bart to prank call him. Like he says, he loves to laugh. I also liked Abe's revelation that he lied about getting sent back to America in the war, only to find out that he really was getting sent back the next day. In the end though, you can chalk this one down as another subpar travel episode. Season 15, Episode 5, The Fat and the Furriest. After Homer is filmed getting attacked by a bear, he decides to hunt down the bear for revenge. Soon he befriends the bear, and helps him get to the nature preserve safely. In the nightmare that Homer has about bears coming to get him, we see Winnie the Pooh, Paddington Bear, Gummy Bears, Smokey the Bear, 2 bears wearing Chicago Bears uniforms, a Care Bear with a crowbar, among many more. Basically what I'm trying to say is that there were a lot of bears. And my best moment was Homer creating his giant sugar ball. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. So the plot for this one is all over the place and switches gears far too randomly to ever be considered good. Act 1 was all about Homer making this giant sugar ball from a homemade carnival machine. That was kind of a weird thing to devote an entire intro to, but hey, I did enjoy Homer laughing maniacally as he created his sugar monstrosity. From there, we jump into Homer getting attacked by a bear, which, in turn, leads to the entire town mocking him. That felt pretty dumb to me. I mean, the guy got attacked by a bear, for crying out loud. What did they expect him to do? That being said though, the story does draw to a somewhat satisfying conclusion. It is nice to see Homer help the bear get to safety. Well, safety from humans anyway, as he was attacked by an elephant right after he got to the nature park. This episode kind of gave off Call of the Simpsons vibes from season 1, probably due to the wilderness aspect both episodes have. Though I did not like this episode quite as much as Call of the Simpsons, and considering that I only gave that episode a 3, it's not exactly a good sign. The jokes were again mixed. I liked Lisa and Bart playing around with Lenny and Carl in the background. However, there were dumb ones, such as Homer smoking a pipe as he is about to get mauled by a bear. That was not only a unfunny moment, it also makes Homer look cartoonishly stupid, which is a trap the writers often fall into with him. Basically, this episode never had a bobbly RV salesman to save it, like Call of the Simpsons did. Season 15, Episode 6, Today I Am a Clown. Krusty comes to realize that he can't find happiness in life because he never had a bar mitzvah. So he reunites with his father and sets about having one. So a fact relating to this episode is that Dan Castellaneta won a Primetime Emmy Award for his various roles here. The best moment in this episode was Homer hosting a TV show. This one is a 2 out of 5. I have never really cared for Krusty's father, or any of the stories relating to his Jewish heritage for that matter, so it is no surprise I found that side of things very boring. I don't really care whether Krusty has a bar mitzvah or not, yet that whole dilemma dragged on until the closing scene where he finally got one. Not only was I not invested in the Krusty side of things, it also felt rather forced. Like, why are Bart and Lisa just randomly walking through the Jewish community? Why, so they can bump into Krusty, of course. We need to get the plot started somehow, right? Now, I know that is kind of a pedantic criticism, but I thought I'd mention it because it stood out to me as so unnatural, and as such, it hurt any flow the episode had. As I said, Homer taking over from Krusty turned out to be the best part of the episode. I enjoyed Homer and his friends ramble on about the general annoyances of life. It was also good to see the townspeople relate to them. Sadly though, nothing really came of this in the end. It all kind of ended as soon as Lisa decided that she wanted to hijack the program with political messages. Now that may well be a realistic portrayal of what would happen if a program did that in real life, but still, it was a shame to waste the potential that Homer's talk show had. The jokes were not there either in my opinion. I don't think there was even a smile-worthy one among them, let alone a laugh-worthy one. This is just an episode that is easily forgettable. Season 15, Episode 7, 'Tis the 15th Season. After spending all the money on an expensive gift for himself, the family is angry at Homer. In order to be less selfish, he tries replacing Ned Flanders as the good guy in town. Some trivia for this one is that the style of title is reused for the season 30 episode, 'Tis the 30th Season. My best bit here was Homer trying to get Mr. Burns to donate money in church. This one is a 3 out of 5. The plot was pretty standard. It was all about Homer being selfish, then working to try and make it up to everyone. It was done in a solid way though. It was nice to see Homer go out of his way to make people happy, and there was a twist in the rivalry that develops between him and Ned. I am kind of mixed in how I feel about that. On one hand, I do like their petty attempts to one-up each other, but because it was also petty, it was lacking in any real emotional stakes. Also, Homer stealing the presents Ned brought, only to be forgiven right away, was kind of silly. That was also the ending of the episode, by the way. Just throw in the town singing a Christmas carol and that is your lot. The ending just felt far too rushed. The jokes, on the other hand, were actually fine overall, especially if you include a few of the parodies that they did. I enjoyed the Christmas rendition of the Convoy song, as well as the Scrooge Christmas Carol retelling. I also liked the banner at the Rich People Mall that read, "Our prices discriminate because we can't." Throw into the mix Homer buying Lenny a box with corners which don't injure his eye, and pestering Mr. Burns in church, and you have enough good content here. Still, I did roll my eyes at Lisa trying to pretend that she, as a Buddhist, thinks that everyone would be better off without presents. I guess she conveniently forgot that she was just as annoyed as Bart and Marge when Homer didn't get them any presents earlier on in the episode. Season 15, Episode 8, Marge vs. Singles, Seniors, Childless Couples, and Teens and Gays. After Lindsay Naegle forms an anti-children group, Marge decides to fight back by making a group of her own. My trivia here is that the Rufy character is a parody of children's entertainer Raffi, and my best moment was Rufy's song. This episode is a 2 out of 5. This plot was just far too sloppy to be any good. The whole town-wide divide between people with kids and people without them seems to kick in for no good reason. It seemed like the writers were trying to make some kind of point regarding taxes and whatnot, but they never really focused on that, so it lacked any real bite. Instead, they broadened the scope to the entire town, showing them destroying kid-friendly things. This was completely over the top, and made much of the town look unlikable. And let's face it, the townspeople don't exactly need much help to seem unlikable. The ending of everyone getting ill from the kids, rendering them unable to vote, was also a rather unconvincing way for things to go back to normal. The jokes here weren't much better. To be honest, I did kind of like the Rufy songs. They did a good job of showing how annoyed the rest of the family was by them, and I loved how Maggie and Marge were enjoying it the entire time. However, those were the only okay scenes in the episode. A lot of the time it felt like they were trying far too hard. Season 15, Episode 9, Doh-Bot. Bart and Homer enter a robot rumble competition. Meanwhile, Snowball 2 dies after being hit by a car. After several failed attempts, Lisa replaces her with a cat that looks exactly the same. So, a bit of important trivia relating to this episode. The show Robot Rumble is a parody of robot combat shows Robot Wars and BattleBots. My best moment was Homer in the robot battles. I gave this episode a 3 out of 5. So I'm going to have to talk about the main and subplot separately here, as I certainly enjoyed one much more than the other. The main one was about Homer trying to impress Bart after embarrassing him in front of the bullies. That type of dynamic is nothing new, but they framed it in an interesting way. Bart likes the Robot Rumble show, so Homer tries and fails to build him a robot. Not one to give up though, Homer literally gets inside the robot himself. You have to admire his bravery if nothing else. To be honest, given all of the damage he took and potentially life-threatening situations he put himself in just to make Bart happy, it was only right that Bart respected him in the end. Of course, the whole thing was a parody of BattleBots and Robot Wars. BattleBots being the American version of the show, Robot Wars being the European version. I did very much enjoy that side of things too. It probably helps that some people in my family actually have a personal connection with that show. My older brother and my cousin were actually contestants on the original version of Robot Wars. So as someone who knows the show quite well, it is nice to see it on The Simpsons. As for the subplot, given that I am a bit of a cat person, I guess you could say that I have a personal connection with that too. I am not a big fan of it, I must say. It was just very morbid having all of these cats killed off straight away. Now I understand it is a cartoon of course, and Snowball 2 was never an important character on the show. Still though, none of it seemed to have any purpose outside of maybe some shock value. It didn't seem to be played for laughs, and even if it was, I personally did not find it funny. Also, its ending was a total cop-out, as I acknowledged with the whole Principal Tamzarian callback. I just don't see the point of killing Snowball 2 off if you're going to pretend like you didn't going forward. It was just a bit odd. Despite my frustrations with that subplot, the main plot still had enough good moments to make this episode a decent one. Season 15, Episode 10, Diatribe of a Mad Housewife. Marge is inspired to write a romance novel. However, Homer is jealous when a character based on Ned Flanders is portrayed better than him. So, some trivia which you might have been able to notice is that Dr. Marvin Monroe appears in this episode. It had been hinted at in the past that he was dead, but here he explains that he was just very sick. My best moment was Homer working as a used car salesman. So, do I like this episode as much as Homer likes Marge's novel? I like it a bit more than that in fairness. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I was initially skeptical about this episode when it started off with Homer getting fired from his job again. We have seen that storyline far too often lately, and they rarely make it work. This one though really won me over as it went on. The main plot about Marge writing a novel was nicely done. It is always good to see Marge channel that creative side that she has. It is also understandable that she would base a character in her book on Homer, given how much he was annoying her. The conclusion to that story was also quite clever. The way in which Homer chasing Ned mirrored Marge's book. Homer was acting irresponsible all episode and was taking Marge for granted, so it was nice to see him realize that. He even ended up learning a good lesson after being man enough to ask Ned for advice. While Marge was writing her book throughout the episode, off to the side, Homer was trying out various new jobs. His ambulance driving fell a bit flat for me, but as I said, I did enjoy his brief stint as a car salesman. Those few scenes produced the episode's most amusing moments. I loved Homer's evil laugh as he goes to spy on the couple. I also liked how the couple ditched them after Homer farted and turned on the radio to cover up the smell. That was a funny joke, and it was such a Homer thing to do as well. In addition to those more overt jokes, there were also some well-hidden observational ones. For example, the Krusty Burger menu at the drive-thru. The offer of buying all of the meals in one was actually more expensive than just buying them all individually. All in all, this episode had a solid plot, along with plenty of things to keep me entertained. Season 15, Episode 11, Margical History Tour. Marge, the kids, and Milhouse go to the library, where they find there are no books on the shelves. To help the kids write their reports, Marge tells the children 3 historical tales. So, the trivia here is that some Yu-Gi-Oh! Price guide posters can be seen in the library. I used to play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a kid, and I quite liked the anime, so that definitely stuck out to me. My best moment was Henry VIII's marriage counselling. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This is in a similar mould to the previous 3-parters really, in that there is some intrigue to be found in how the Simpsons characters play famous historical figures. At the same time though, they never really rise to anything amazing, as the 3 parts all kind of end before they are able to really hit their stride. The first part featuring Homer as Henry VIII was my favourite of the 3. It has some good comedy and laughs to be found, such as divorce will be so easy, more than half of marriages will end in it. I also did love the absurdity of Henry VIII being dragged to marriage counselling. I would probably say that part was the most historically accurate of the 3 as well, which I suppose is a nice bonus. The other 2 parts weren't quite as good, but they still brought an interesting story to the table. The Sacagawea story was not that funny, but it was cool to see Lisa in that role. And adding Lenny and Carl as Lewis and Clark was a good choice. The final part was worth it just to see Bart as a mischievous Mozart, even if the rivalry with his sister seemed to be a bit tacked on. In the end, this was a solid episode I think. It never got boring at least, which can sometimes happen with these trilogy stories. Season 15, Episode 12, Milhouse doesn't live here anymore. When Milhouse moves away, both his father and Bart realize how much he meant to them. Bart soon finds a new friendship from an unlikely source, Lisa. Meanwhile, Homer pretends to be a hobo. So Mr. Burns refers to Lenny, Homer and Carl as Snap, Crackle and Pop, which are of course the 3 mascots for the breakfast cereal Rice Krispies. And my best moment here was quite an obvious one. It was Willie's rant about Scots. This one got a 4 out of 5. The plot worked well here I thought. There was a lot of interesting character stuff going on. Firstly, we had the rare side of Milhouse being a rebel, which was of course brought on by his upcoming move to Capital City. I did like how that impacted both him and Bart. Their friendship is portrayed as a bit of a joke at times, But here it clearly shows that they do care for each other deep down. Just seeing how sad Bart actually gets over his move is quite impactful by itself, really. As he is left with no best friend, it is also understandable that he starts to spend more time with Lisa. Their relationship gets a quick examine too. It was nice to see that they can enjoy spending time together when they allow that sibling rivalry aspect to go. As Willie pointed out though, them being best friends was never going to last. And to be honest, that is probably a good thing. The ending was good because, even though things went back to normal, with Milhouse coming home, it was not all a waste of time. Bart does learn a lesson about being a better brother, and the ending was actually quite sweet. The subplot of Homer grifting as a homeless person was a bit lackluster though, which stops any chance this had at being a 5. The jokes overall were kind of middle of the road. I enjoyed some of Kirk's pathetic antics. However, Ralph's cameo appearance I was not a big fan of. Just bringing him in to say a few stupid lines is by far the weakest way to use his character. I can forgive that though, because the standout moment of this episode was very funny. I adored Willie's rant about Scottish people being enemies with everyone, and the "you just made an enemy for life" was a great way to round that off. I think as an English person, it is even more relatable to me, given the rivalry that England has with Scotland. Season 15, Episode 13, Smart and Smarter. Lisa becomes jealous of Maggie when she is accepted into a gifted school. She then begins to search for a new home, where she can retain her identity as a smart one. The title of this episode is a reference to the 1994 movie Dumb and Dumber. It is literally just an inversion of that title really, isn't it? My best moment was the interactions between the police. After much deliberation, I gave this a 2 out of 5. I'm just mixed on the plot here. On one hand, a Maggie plot is always welcome, but on the other hand, yet another Lisa identity crisis certainly isn't. I was enjoying the bits at the start, with Maggie learning new things at the school, but sadly that got rudely interrupted by Lisa. Of course, Maggie was never going to carry an entire episode by herself, and I wouldn't mind a Lisa story if it was done well. However, the way they went here just didn't work for me. She literally runs away from home just because she's getting jealous of Maggie, a baby. And why is she jealous? Because she was told that Maggie has a slightly higher IQ than her. So yeah, you probably understand how petty this all felt. And because Lisa's actions were so petty, I did not really care to follow her in this episode. I also didn't like the ending. It was all a bit crazy with the family getting stuck in that big human model, and the twist was even worse. Lisa had apparently been giving Maggie all of the answers the whole time, subconsciously, which was not foreshadowed in any way, and if you think about it for more than a few seconds, doesn't make a lick of sense. She was apparently giving these hand signals, which we, the viewers, did not see at the time, but if she was doing that, how come no one else saw them? You'd think that Simon Cowell especially would be able to pick up on that. That was a plot hole as far as I'm concerned, and a needless one at that. The jokes were nothing special for the most part, even though there were some okay ones, pretty much all coming from the cops. I loved the banter between Chief Wiggum, Eddie and Lou, and my favourite line here comes from Wiggum, as Marge is filling out the performance sheet. Somewhat satisfied? Well then maybe I'll just somewhat find your daughter. That was just such a Wiggum thing to say, and it got a laugh out of me. Still, it was not enough to fully make up for the poor story. Season 15, Episode 14, The Ziff Who Came to Dinner. Artie Ziff returns to Springfield and asks to stay with the Simpsons family until he gets back on his feet. However, he tricks Homer into taking a fall for his illegal business practices. So, some trivia is that the book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is referenced here. Lisa tells Artie that Homer believes the factory is real and searches for it. My best moment was the re-deadening movie. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. The plot felt disjointed at times, but it did start out pretty strong, with Homer taking Lisa, Bart, Rod and Todd to the re-deadening. I enjoyed seeing how freaked out the kids were by it, and how Lenny, of all people, managed to get a part in a film. The whole bit is topped off with Homer buying the movie soundtrack, which scares Bart and Lisa at a dinner table. Once we actually get into the Artie Ziff stuff, things become a bit muddled in my opinion. Not only is it a bit far-fetched that he has been living in the Simpsons attic, it is also rather a sudden revelation that his company has gone bust. There was no hint of this in the previous episodes, so it kind of feels like the writers just arbitrarily used this plot point as an excuse to get Homer put into jail. Not much does come from Homer in prison either. We get one scene of the family missing him, but he was soon got out by Artie anyway, who finally does the right thing. I'm not sure why sleeping with Selma was the thing to get him to do it, but okay. In the end, this was not one of the best Artie Ziff episodes by a long shot, but as is always the case, he does have some good moments. I enjoyed seeing how bad he was at poker, and his scene in court with Marge made me laugh. Marge calls him out on being selfish, and Artie tries to deny it. But then he has this fantasy with 5 versions of him singing his name to the can-can music. That gag was just much funnier than I expected it to be. Season 15, Episode 15, Codependence Day. After a trip to a vineyard, Homer and Marge go binge drinking together. But when Homer crashes a car while drunk driving, he frames a passed out Marge to avoid being arrested. So some trivia is that Cosmic Wars was an obvious parody of Star Wars, while the Randall Curtis character is based on Star Wars creator George Lucas. And my best moment, which is probably the only decent moment of the episode, was Homer's hold music. I just love how over the top he was about it, with the whole la 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 la, and how he also did that kind of thing to Bart and Lisa when they were questioning him. 1 out of 5. That is this episode in a nutshell. The first half of this was mostly just boring. It was filled with unfunny jokes and scenes which didn't seem to have much purpose. The Star Wars parody they do was decent, I suppose. They do a good job of capturing what people's reaction to the prequels was really like. It is a bit unfortunate though, that they chose this episode to call out George Lucas and the Star Wars series for declining in quality. Given how bad this episode is, it makes them look like hypocrites. The main chunk of the episode was about Homer and Marge getting addicted to drinking together. Marge tries to quit drinking, but is unable to, and ends up getting drunk at Oktoberfest. It is right after that we get the infamous scene of Homer framing Marge for DUI. I mean, it's kind of bad enough that Homer drove drunk and crashed the car anyway, but to do that to Marge on top is horrible. It is easily one of the worst things he's done in the show. The only thing that comes close is probably what he did to Grandpa in Homer Simpson in Kidney Trouble. But this could arguably be seen as worse, because we are meant to think more highly of the Homer and Marge relationship than the Homer Grandpa one. That bombshell scene happened at the end of Act 2 as well, which meant that the writers only gave themselves one act to resolve it all. So it should come as no surprise that they completely botched it. The ending of this episode had Marge realizing that it was spending time with Homer that she liked, not drinking. Which is fine and all, but how does that relate to your addiction, or what Homer just did to you? No lessons are learned by the pair at all, as they both end up getting drunk in a rehab center, and the episode ends with them making empty promises to each other. I mean, it's just a mess because you need to commit to something. You basically spent the entire episode showing us how bad an influence Homer is on Marge, and how their relationship is being ruined by alcohol, and you never even bothered to conclude it in a meaningful way. This not only makes their relationship look like a harmful joke, it also kind of trivializes alcoholism, which is obviously not a good message to be sending. To add one final nail in this episode's coffin, this also fits into the Kill the Alligator and Run and Saddle Saw Galactica category. Like in those episodes, I can detect a self-awareness from the writers about how crap this is. This is best shown by Homer saying, "This is a new low for me," after he framed Marge. Marge said a very similar thing in Kill the Alligator and Run. So yeah, this is a terrible episode. Easily one of the worst I've seen so far. Season 15, Episode 16, The Wandering Juvie. The Wandering Juvie. When Bart scams the town with a fake wedding, he is sent to Juvie Hall. He is then tethered to female inmate Gina Vendetti, who decides to escape from the facility. So a bit of info is that the song playing during the prison dance is Color My World by Chicago. And the best moment here for me was the ending. This one is a 3 out of 5. The plot was solid enough. Obviously Bart getting into trouble is nothing new, but him getting sent to Juvie is something different, and I enjoyed quite a few of the scenes in there. Of course Bart had to go through some cruel stuff, but it is kind of understandable in that kind of environment. Also, they don't actually show much of his suffering on screen, which is definitely for the better. Given that she was introduced early, it was obvious that the story would have a lot to do with this Gina girl. The way they escaped from the prison may be unrealistic, but in this kind of story I don't really care too much. I think the main reason for that is that it meant they were able to show off Bart's character in an interesting way. He still has the rebellious side to him, as is shown by his snarky comments, but he is understandably scared of being on the run from the law. Bart is shown in a sympathetic light throughout the episode really, and it does make you want to see him get out of this bad situation. Gina was an interesting one. She and Bart do have some nice moments together, but she is a bit crazy, and this type of personality does get draining after a while, just as dealing with someone like that would do in real life. The ending was sweet enough though. Gina did at least try and show she is honourable by taking the blame for something that she did and letting Bart go free. The party the family threw for her in jail was fine too. So the story was above average, I would say, but the jokes were slightly below average. None of them were that great, which let the episode down a tad. Cletus being able to whittle the future of Wiggum being attacked by a bear was probably the best out of them. Season 15, Episode 17, My Big Fat Geek Wedding. After hearing that Principal Skinner is having cold feet, Mrs. Krabappel leaves him at the altar. She soon falls for a comic book guy and they plan a wedding, which Skinner tries to prevent. So this episode is a reference to the 2002 movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and my best moment was the song that Skinner and Bart sing for Mrs. Krabappel. This one is a 2 out of 5. Up until now, I've largely enjoyed the Skinner-Edna pairing, as I have had several good episodes centered around them since they first got together back in Season 8. I knew what was coming though, and this episode is not a good send-off for them. Sure, it was kind of inevitable that their relationship was doomed to fail, given all of the outside factors on Seymour's end. Still though, I feel they could have made it more meaningful than this. Skinner does not really give an explanation as to why he is getting cold feet, so you can't really sympathize with him in any way. Edna does the right thing in ditching him, given that he was not willing to commit to her. She even gets Marge to agree that she made the right decision. Still, they managed to blow that angle by bringing comic book guy into the mix. Now, I like him as a character, but I don't see how he adds anything here. He has no chemistry with Edna at all, so their scenes together were not only boring, they also had no real point. This is all confirmed by the ending, where Edna rejects both comic book guy and Seymour and ends up single again. Oh, and of course, we had the obligatory Homer and Marge fallout here as well. We simply can't have an episode about another couple's problems without shoehorning some Homer and Marge drama in as well. I'm not even going to talk about the Homer and Marge stuff, it was a total waste of time. This was not a funny episode either really. At least the Edna K version of A Lion Sleeps Tonight was reasonably good, I suppose. Season 15, Episode 18, Catch 'em If You Can. When Bart and Lisa realize that Marge and Homer have gone to Miami without them, the kids decide to track them down. So my trivia for this episode is that the title parodies the 2002 crime film Catch Me If You Can, as does the scene where Bart and Lisa run after Homer and Marge. And my favourite moment was that scene, the Catch Me If You Can parody. Overall, I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This plot was just far too all over the place to be any good. The episode's conflict just started out as Homer and Marge being annoyed at Bart and Lisa's fighting. Then it suddenly became this countrywide chase with Bart and Lisa trying to track them down. I actually liked Homer and Marge deciding to secretly go to Miami for a holiday, with Grandpa looking after the kids. If this episode just stayed with them having a good time, then I would have probably liked it more. Instead, Bart and Lisa go after them to, in their own words, stop them from having fun. Honestly, this episode does a great job of making Bart and Lisa look bad. They are just so petty and entitled here, so much so that Marge was right to have a go at them. She should have been more harsh if anything. The ending was just as ridiculous as what came before. Homer and Marge somehow end up going over Niagara Falls in a bouncy castle. But don't worry, they are perfectly fine. After all, why wouldn't they be? I'm not even done with criticizing the plot yet. There was also this Grandpa subplot of him trying to pick up old women in Florida. Not only was that unfunny, it didn't even have any conclusion, which only added to the episode's uneven feel. There were at least a few things in the episode's favour which got it to a 2 at least. Some of the early stuff with Bart and Lisa fighting was enjoyable, and the movie parody was great. It used the style of the Catch Me If You Can intro well, and it was just a creative thing to do. It also helped that it was all just Homer's imagination as he was asleep in an aeroplane toilet. That is about all for this episode, aside from the obvious question of where was Maggie? Season 15, Episode 19, Simple Simpson. Homer becomes a masked superhero known as the Pie Man. He uses pies in order to battle crime in Springfield. So my trivia here is that the scene when Marge kisses an upside down Homer dressed as Pie Man is a parody of a scene from the 2002 film Spider-Man. My best moment was Homer's failed attempt to escape from Mr. Burns. This episode is a 4 out of 5. There is literally one selling point for this episode. You get to see Homer with a secret identity running around throwing pies in people's face. That is the entire point. And you know what? I was on board with it. Sure, it does get a bit repetitive at times, and the Homer vs. Dignity type blackmail from Mr. Burns I didn't really get into. For the most part though, it remains fun and light-hearted. I think the reason that it works for me so well is that the writers don't try and pretend that Homer's identity is some kind of big mystery. They acknowledge how it is so obviously him in that suit. Marge and Lisa even point out how obvious it is to Homer himself. Sure, most of the town can't figure it out, but that kind of says more about how dumb they are than anything else. Basically, what I am saying is that I think the self-aware meta stuff in the episode works quite well, which is not something I say often about this era of the show. You even have the joke about Homer pieing Krusty because his show had slightly declined in quality over the years. That was no doubt a jab at the fans. Another joke I found funny was Homer talking to all of the pies. I love how he imagined them all having unique personalities. Homer running away from Burns was the pick of the bunch though. I like how he slowly runs up a set of stairs, then goes to sleep on a couch, which happens to be right in front of Mr. Burns in his office. In the end, this was not the greatest episode ever or anything, but it was quite creative, and made for a fun 22 minutes. Season 15, Episode 20, The Way We Weren't. When Homer admits to Marge that she was not his first kiss, we flash back to Homer and Marge as kids at summer camp. So my trivia here relates to a future episode, and it is that in the season 19 episode Eternal Moonshine of the Simpson Mind, Homer forgets this first kiss. Bart then makes him believe that his first kiss was with Apu, and my favourite bit in this episode was the ending. This flashback episode gets a 4 out of 5. I found this to be an enjoyable outing. It did a decent job of expanding on Homer and Marge's past, unlike some post-classic seasons. Sure, it wasn't really necessary for Homer and Marge to have met each other prior to high school, but it was still a nice touch that they did. I also liked how they fell for each other even as kids. We already saw how it was love at first sight between them in high school, so that makes perfect sense. The other campers also brought a few fun moments. Seeing how Moe was just as pathetic as a teenager as he is as an adult was quite good. I also liked Patty and Selma here. Sure, they were as nasty as ever, but they didn't do any harm here. Well, unless you count Patty kissing Homer as harm, that is. The ending was quite nice, as I mentioned, with Homer and Marge having this extra connection after finding out that they both kept their half of the Heart's Stone. I don't have much else to say on this one. It was just interesting to see a lot of the characters as kids. Sure, some of the events here could be seen as contrived, but if we get a solid episode out of it, then it's not the end of the world. Season 15, Episode 21, Bart-Mangled Banner. A photo showing Bart accidentally mooning the US flag angers all of Springfield, and makes the Simpsons the most hated family in town. So my trivia for this one is that the episode title is a not so subtle play on the USA's national anthem, The Star-Spangled Banner. The best moment for me was Bart trying to escape Dr. Hibbert. This episode gets a 2 out of 5. It started out somewhat promisingly with the trip to the doctor's. It was fun to see Bart go so far in trying to get out of his shots. After the jab causes him to go temporarily deaf, he ends up mooning the flag in a dumb way. Like he puts the carrot in his shorts, which the donkey rips out, and in turn it rips his pants off. Not only was that rather silly, the fact that it leads to the family becoming pariahs and eventually getting jailed is just not realistic. Now I get that this is meant to be a take on patriotism getting out of hand, and this whole thing is meant to be kind of a hyper parody of that, but I don't really see what message the writers were trying to send. Was it that some people can get carried away in the name of being patriotic? Of course that is true, but I think we all know that already, and in my opinion it's not as big a deal as this episode tries to make out. So yeah, I just could not really get behind the satire in this one. If you have a different opinion on this, feel free to comment. I am always open to discussing this stuff with you guys. Aside from the failed political stuff, there seems to be no main focus to the episode either. The plot jumped from a talk show to a prison, which just happens to be Alcatraz, to France, with no real smoothness. The ending is a total joke, too, as the Simpsons go back to America as immigrants, and suddenly all is well again. The jokes were very subpar indeed. Far too many obvious ones, and people repeating things over and over to make sure that we didn't miss them. I did like Homer stepping on the models of the White House and Mount Rushmore at a mini golf course though. That is a typical clumsy thing that he would do. In the end, this was kind of a nothing episode really. It only narrowly avoided being a 1 because the first 8 minutes or so were okay. Season 15, Episode 22, Fraudcast News. When Mr. Burns is falsely reported dead, the media says what they truly felt about him. To prevent such a negative portrayal of himself, Burns buys all the media outlets in Springfield. The only one he can't buy is Lisa's small paper. So my trivia for this one is that the squeaky-voiced teen jumps off Giza Rock, depressed due to the cancellation of Futurama, which is of course a very popular show, also created by Matt Groening. My best moment was Mr. Burns meeting with Lisa. This one is a 5 out of 5. So, the season finale saves this season from being the first one without a 5 episode. I thought we were finally at that point, but no, the wait goes on for at least another season. This also continues the rather peculiar trend of the last 3 season finales being a 5. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm certainly not complaining. Anyway, onto the episode. I think the plot works really well. Sure, it starts out a bit slowly with the Giza Rock tribute and Mr. Burns getting crushed, but as soon as Burns launches his campaign to control the media, things pick up. There is a lot of good satire here, which given the last episode is a major surprise. They get into what happens to free speech if there is a monopoly in the media. The point the episode makes is that people should be thinking for themselves and not gobbling up the propaganda. That is as relevant today as it ever has been. Lisa starting her own small paper to tackle the media corruption was nice to see, and the ending where she gets everyone interested was a positive message to end on. I also liked Homer's portrayal here. He has his typical funny, over-the-top moments of course, but he is also shown to be caring of Lisa's plight, and does pull through for her in the end. As good as the plot was, I think the comedy on offer was just as good. There were lots of great gags scattered throughout, such as Lisa making Nelson a TV critic because his skill was making nerds cry. A TV critic would certainly accomplish that. I also loved Homer using the last few batteries in the house to sing along to the song Wannabe for a few seconds. It was totally worth it. You also have Mr. Burns trying and failing to crash an ant. And my favourite of the lot, his meeting with Lisa. I love how after their big argument, Lisa still has to stay with him until Marge picks her up. Mr. Burns awkwardly tries some small talk, asking her opinions on popular music, but Lisa isn't interested, saying that it distracts people from more important social issues. His response to that of, "My god, are you always on?" is just perfect. I mean, it is great that Lisa is trying to do some good in the world, but really, it wouldn't hurt her to lighten up now and again, would it? So yeah, this episode just had a bit of everything for me. Easily one of my favourite post-classic episodes so far. So with that, every episode of Season 15 is reviewed, and here is the season summary. The overall average score for the season is 2.9, which is the second lowest after Season 11, and only the second time that we have slipped into the 2s. In terms of my bottom 5 episodes of the year, there were a lot to choose from to be fair, given the amount of 2 out of 5 episodes in this season, but this is what my list ended up being. In at number 5, with a shortened title so I could actually fit it on the screen, is Marge vs Single Seniors, Childless Couples and Teens and Gays. 4th is My Big Fat Geek Wedding. 3rd is Catch 'em If You Can. The second worst, which was quite a bit clear of the third worst, is Bart-Mangled Banner. And the worst, which is quite a bit clear of second worst, is Codependence Day. On to the more positive top 5 list now. Simple Simpson was 5th, The President Wore Pearls was 4, Diatribe of a Mad Housewife was 3rd, Milhouse Doesn't Live Here Anymore was 2nd, and Fraudcast News was by far the best of the year. So, what do I think of this season as a whole? As I said at the start of the video, since season 12 we have been kind of plateaued in terms of the standard of episodes, and I was curious to see if we could break that plateau. I think we did break it here. Sadly though, we broke it in a wrong way. As the rating suggests, I do think this season is a step down in quality from the last three, and if I had to give it a ranking, it would probably be bad. Now, it is definitely on the mild side of bad for sure. Codependence Day may well have been the worst episode yet, but that is the only real abysmal episode here. Bart-Mangled Banner is quite bad, but I don't think it's quite one territory. So for that reason, I still think season 11 is definitely worse than this one. We have yet to see anything as bad as the second half of that season, and we probably won't for some time. What really dragged this season down for me was the amount of lackluster episodes, which is shown by how many 2 out of 5s this got. They weren't exactly episodes which were particularly interesting in their failure either, just rather dull and quite unfunny. Also, with the exception of Fraudcast News, the good episodes here were not great either, which is another thing against this season. So basically, with the exception of Codependence Day and Fraudcast News, the extremes on both ends were not quite that extreme. As ever though, I do want to try and leave you on a positive note. There were a few things in here which I liked better than the last few seasons. Marge was a vast improvement on last year, which I know is not saying much, but at least she was back to normal here. I also like that we got to see Mr. Burns as a real villainous presence in 2 of the episodes here, those being Fraudcast News and My Mother the Carjacker. He doesn't appear as much as he used to, so when he does show up, I like it when Burns is used in a big role. In terms of the themes in these episodes, as is the case quite often with The Simpsons, there was a lot of media bashing going on. The episodes Bart-Mangled Banner, Fraudcast News, and The Fat and the Furriest all had elements of the plot being about the media blowing things out of proportion, which in turn, of course, led to the entire town blowing things out of proportion. Again, this is not a dynamic we haven't seen before, but this season is one of the ones which showed it off the most, very much in that kind of season 5 mode when it comes to media bashing. So if you are into that type of thing, then this season might be a worthwhile watch. But other than to those people, and hardcore fans of the show, who, let's face it, would probably watch it anyway, I can't really recommend this season overall. Instead, you would be better off picking a few individual episodes out and giving them a watch if you like the look of them. Anyway, that is all for season 15. If you did enjoy this review and watched it to the end, then I would appreciate a like on the video. And I will see you all next time for season 16. Take care guys.